All right. I think that should be good. How's everyone doing tonight? I guess I could boost the volume just a little. How's that sound now? Okay. I think we're getting clear now. How's everyone doing? Give everyone just a second to join. We are, I really am going to shoot for 9 o'clock sharp. I never seem to quite be prepared enough to hit 9 o'clock sharp, so we'll work on it. I'll try to get it at 9. Although I feel like 9 is already too late for my European viewers. It's just what time works for me. Maybe in the future we'll try to switch back to 5 or maybe even a little earlier. 5 is a bad time. It's about time to start making dinner, stuff like that. We eat early, I think. I like to eat at 5, but I think a lot of people eat a lot later than 5. But which means we have to start working on dinner at like 4:30. It tells you how much we prepare for dinner. All right, so I guess this is about as many viewers as we are going to get for the start. So welcome everyone. I hope that you have had a fantastic weekend and you're ready for another fantastic week. We're from everything from chip shortages this week to security to Seagate's 100 terabyte drives by 2030. That's at least what they said, that they'd have a 100 terabyte drive by 2030. I've got you covered with the news for this week. Sadly, we have had so much this week to cover. Again, I have had to cut out some things, so if you missed something, I'm sorry. I tried to keep it to the most relevant, while also not just covering news. We have our section at the very end for open source projects. All right, so before I begin, this week I recorded my M1 Mac review, which will be posted sometime this following week as soon as the editing is done. And this coming weekend, I'm going to be recording my cloud hosting for Kubernetes review. So I've been working over the last several months testing each and every single cloud out there and building a review on how the cloud works, how easy it is to use, how performant, and what it costs. So I am putting that all into a video. If you have any specific questions, go ahead and either ask on a comment on this video, tweet at me, and let me know, or join the Discord and let me know if you have any actual questions around that so I can answer them. All right, so let's start tonight off with security really quickly. I don't have a whole lot. I wanted to keep it light because we've talked so much about security, but it would behoove me to miss a few of these things. So we have had the SolarGate and all of that. So basically how these worked was actually an attack on the build process or the build artifacts. And it's build hijacking, as was noted here. So anyways, GitHub has some code scanning. Now, GitHub is owned by Microsoft, so it would make sense that they would be very fast to release some of this stuff. So GitHub has released some stuff to help you with your repositories with this, so it's definitely worth checking this out. These links will be available on the description of the video as soon as I have finished it. So it's definitely worth checking out. Good blog article too that went into in-depth on how it does what it does. So along with this, this was announced a while ago, but it's finally made its thing, the SIG store. If you don't know what the SIG store is, the SIG store is basically, and now the project has escaped my mind, but this SIG store is going to basically give an open source way of signing your release artifacts. So Let's Encrypt. It's basically the Let's Encrypt of artifact signing, or that's what it's going to be. It's nothing right now, but there's a Slack. I'm going to join it, and I'm going to start digging into it a little bit. Maybe I'll do a video on what the SIG store is and the technologies it's going to use, but it's going to be the Let's Encrypt of your basically software distribution. So that's actually pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about it. And I'll keep you guys in the loop as we go. All right, so here we have another thing that came from all of this, and it's basically the open source vulnerability database made by Google. So they're making a database of all the CVEs for open source projects. So it's easy to keep in one place. So anyways, you should check it out. I haven't fully checked it out quite yet. It looks pretty interesting, and yeah, you can curl it. It has an API, so you could use this for a bot or some other things like that. That's actually what I wanted to try doing with it, was kind of build a bot around it that maybe checked your code for CVEs in the open source projects. So anyways, this is really cool, and all of this has come out of the SolarGate, or it's Securitiy gate. I don't know. There's an I in there, but I just ignore the I because the I is hard to pronounce, or I don't know how to pronounce it. It might not be hard to pronounce. All right, and that's it for our security. Let's move on to our cloud providers. So really, AWS is the only one that released, and they released a little bit of stuff. So this is the very first one, and I actually looked up some open source projects that we'll see later on in this show that you can use that do some of the same things. So this is a fault injection simulator. So basically it allows you in your AWS infrastructure to inject faults. And this is actually a really cool way to actually test your stuff. So I know we talk a lot about like writing tests and unit tests and things like that, but one of the problems with unit tests is you're testing logic, and your logic that you write your test for might not be good. So writing good tests is a hard thing to do. And this helps because basically it will say, well, not only do our tests only certain limited, one second, let me rephrase that. Not only do tests bring you only a limited scope of what you can test, even integration tests, this brings you yet another level of testing that you can put on your project where you can inject random faults that you might not have thought about. I should write a script or something. Anyways, if you're on AWS, there is some price decrease for Glacier. So basically, Glacier is their cold storage that allows you to keep things for very cheaply. And it used to be very expensive to pull data back out of it. So basically, it was cheap to store, but it started to cost if you wanted to pull data back out of it, which would be really great for a cold backup. And it got a little bit cheaper to pull data back out. So you should check that out. They have some audio here that you can listen to. There was an announcement. I think that this was at their reInvent. So there's an audio announcement. So anyways, that's pretty cool. The cloud competition is keeping it cheap or competitive. So, oh yeah, 40% reduction for put and lifecycle requests. I don't know what a lifecycle request is. What is a life? I don't know. Lifecycle requests. All right. Lifecycle is one of those things that software engineers use to describe everything. You know, you're like, oh, well, I work on the Kubernetes lifecycle. What do you mean? The lifecycle of the application, of the cluster? Do you mean creating it? Do you mean destroying it? It's a loaded question. All right. So this looked really interesting because it basically allows the S3 object Lambda allows you to add your own code to S3 GET requests to modify as it is returned to an application. So this basically allows you to inject things to modify requests to an S3 GET request. Seemed fairly interesting. Again, I haven't actually gotten to play around with it. It was just on March 18th, so that gives me very little amount of time. I try to explore all of these things into enough detail to explain them, but I don't always get to actually use them before showing them to you guys. So as far as Microsoft and Google, I didn't see anything that really came out as that interesting. Yeah. So we'll move on to some of the blog posts that I found really interesting. So this one was by Cloudflare. Love Cloudflare, very cool company. And they are moving their KAS or Kubernetes communication to gRPC. And they wrote a very detailed blog article on why and what this did. Now, if you're confused as to what gRPC is Google's RPC thing. And if you don't know what RPC is, this is a protocol like REST. So REST is very much a JSON and resource-based request, whereas RPC is more of what you might think of as calling a function. And gRPC is layering on Google's protobufers technology to make fast serialization of your message. So that's what gRPC is at a very high level. Maybe I should do a video on that at some time. But yeah, that's what they did. And yeah, it's a very good, if you're thinking about using gRPC in your Kubernetes clusters for your communication, I would suggest reading this blog post by Cloudflare. All right, so here is one of the most exciting pieces of news we have this week. Yes, here, if you don't know what Linux Next is kind of a dumping ground. That's maybe a bad way, but it's the Linux kernel, but it's kind of the things that are too new to be in the main branch, let's say, but it's its own repository. This is instructions. Now, let's see if I can make this bigger. Sorry. Here we go. This document, let me do it in my important voice. This document describes how to get started with kernel development in Rust. These are the keywords right here, guys. Rust is hitting the Linux kernel. Now, I say it's hitting the Linux kernel just because it's in Linux Next doesn't mean it's in the Linux kernel or will actually make it. There are things that go in Linux Next that don't actually make it into the kernel. Most of the time they do. Most of the time if they make it into Linux Next, it means that it's going to the Linux kernel. And Linus has said that he would approve Rust in the Linux core. So I have high beliefs that this is going to be hitting it. But a lot of the times this will be like the next iteration, but I doubt it for this one. I bet Rust will take 1 or 2 more iterations just because introducing a whole new language, whole new build and everything is going to take more time. But it's exciting news for not only Rust and everybody in the Rust community, but the Linux kernel. I think this will actually make it easier for people to get into the Linux kernel than it is currently. That being said, let's get to chip shortages. Man, I love Pine64. If you guys don't know, I do love Pine64. Great company. I like shouting out. They have this Quartz 64 coming out, and I am going to try to get one of the developer boards so I can do like an early preview for you guys, as well as maybe hopefully help out in this community building these things. But they are... Wow, words are really hard for me tonight. English is actually a horrible language. Sadly, it's the only one I speak, so yeah. Anyways, they're currently having chip shortages, so this is causing problems. So chip shortages are hitting everything from the auto industry to Pine64 and their chips. So that being said, they're having some shortages, so hopefully I'll get one of these boards soon enough so I can show it to you guys. I'm pretty excited about their Quartz 64 boards, though. I'm actually very excited about them. These should be good boards. All right, so GitHub released 2 really cool blog posts. This one is about monorepos. Now, I don't generally use monorepos, and I don't generally like monorepos, but there are cases where they're better than the alternative. And so if you're in one of those cases, or you're in the case where you have to work on a monorepo and it's not your choice, this is a really interesting read. I don't even like monorepos, and I found this read to be quite interesting because it's just talking about how they broke down monorepos to improve the performance on GitHub. It's a very technically challenging article, and I really love reading these because you can learn so much from them. But yeah, so I didn't even it has 56 million developers. That is way more people than I expected to be on GitHub. I don't know why. I was thinking like 5 million maybe. But yeah, so, and over 200 million code repositories. That means for every developer, this is the stat that I got out of this article, was that for every developer, there was 4 repositories. You know, there's only like 6 that actually do something. Shots fired. All right, Dependabot. If you've never used Dependabot, Dependabot is to help you keep your dependencies free of vulnerabilities. This goes back to the Google thing where I was talking about a bot could use this open source vulnerability. Dependabot basically does that. And for the longest of time, Dependabot couldn't do it for private dependencies, for your private repositories. And it's now been updated so that Dependabot can, and it can now help keep your dependencies free of vulnerabilities and up to date for private packages. So if you use Dependabot, this is really cool. If you don't, you should use something like Dependabot or Dependabot itself. I mean, you need to if you're on GitHub. But yeah, so go ahead and check that out. Yeah. This was something that came up. This is TrueNAS and FreeNAS are actually merging. So FreeNAS is going away. I wanted you guys, this was a little confusing. FreeNAS is going away, but the open source is not going away. FreeNAS is merging into TrueNAS. They have been like these separate parallel projects for a long time. And basically it's going to an open core. So basically anything that was provided in TrueNAS that's not in the open core is the enterprise features. But this is also mean that they're actually bringing a lot of functionality and testing and whatnot to the FreeNAS, which will still now be just TrueNAS. So it's actually going to make a better project, and it's going to align everybody in one project. So I'm actually really excited about this. For anybody running their own NAS, this is pretty exciting, and I'm kind of excited to see what TrueNAS. Now I run a Synology NAS because I'm a sucker and I didn't want to manage my own NAS. And well, I mean, I still manage my own NAS, but Synology does most of it for me. It's kind of the one-click deploy. But yeah, I actually had looked into FreeNAS as one of my options. All right, so I had talked earlier about AWS's fault injection simulator, and now we're on to this part of the show where we talk about some projects. And the very first one is Chaos Mesh. So Chaos Mesh is a Kubernetes specific way to introduce chaos into your Kubernetes deployment. So this does several things here for you and allows you to manage how much chaos and whatnot. You can see some of the things they do here, and it's a chaos operator. So this is something you could use in your testing pipeline. So if you deploy this to deploy your application to a test Kubernetes infrastructure, it would be fantastic to have this chaos operator sitting there running so that your tests have to pass with chaos in them. So anyways, if you haven't used this in your projects and want to add a little extra chaos, or if your production just runs too smoothly and you want to introduce a little bit of chaos into production just to keep your customers on their feet, there is Chaos Mesh. Don't use it in production. I'm pretty sure that's not what you want to do. I was joking. All right, so that's actually the only Kubernetes-centric one that I could find. I actually searched for more. If you guys know of one, please let me know because I would love to cover it. But this was the only Kubernetes CNCF. Now, that being said, maybe I didn't get the chance to fully search through Apache because I feel like there's something in Apache. I just couldn't find it in time for today. But if it comes to my head, I will let you guys know, and I will post it in the comments below the video. That being said, I did find Zoom Escaper. I wish I used Zoom at work because this would be fantastic. It basically adds, it's like chaos engineering and chaos mesh for your Zoom calls. It's pretty fantastic. So you should check it out. Anyways, that was more of a joke. It does the same thing. This is an interesting project I came across, which is RunJ. So if you don't know what RunC is what powers pretty much all cloud native Kubernetes containers. So if you talk about CRI-O or Containerd, they all use RunC at the base. This is an OCI compatible runtime for FreeBSD jails. So anyways, this was kind of cool. This dude has been working on it. He has written a lot of code, and it looks fairly well done. Yeah, so anyways, this is kind of cool. So yeah, if you are a FreeBSD type of person and would like to check it out, go ahead and check this out. Yeah. All right, moving on. Linkerd 2. It's a service mesh. I'm not even sure why. I'm taking this out. Back to Chaos Mesh. That was supposed. They have a website too. I don't know why I have both, and they weren't together. That's ridiculous. All right, so this comes to, I have a few watchers who have asked about CI/CD. So there's a couple ways to look at this. I really like Argo, but Argo probably doesn't solve all your problems. Argo is very much about continuous deployment, though I do think that you could run your classical CI with Argo. It might be a little bit more challenging and might not be exactly what it's geared for. One of the questions was if I had to run an air gap, so I couldn't use GitHub Actions, because I am a huge fan of GitHub Actions, especially if your code sits in GitHub Actions. So I found some projects for you guys. Drone is one that I've actually used. Drone is hosted. You can use their cloud runners, but it is actually also an open source project. So you can go and get Drone CI here and actually run it that way. But it is one of the open source projects that you can use to run container native continuous delivery. So it's very similar to GitHub Actions, as is the GoCD project. It's very simple, very similar how you use it to GitHub Actions, but these are things you can actually host on your own infrastructure to run your own CI/CD pipelines. So if those fit your guys' needs, you should go check them out. If that's what you're looking for, go and check those out. And the very last thing we have for tonight. So you know how I made a Raspberry Pi cluster? It's actually in the background. You probably can't see it. It still runs. It still goes. But one of my problems was it doesn't have a dual Ethernet. And because it doesn't have dual Ethernet, I couldn't provide high availability on the network. Well, there is a carrier board now that provides dual Ethernet. This is fantastic. I might be able to make a truly highly available, minus a router, network for my Raspberry Pis without spending an arm and a leg, even though these carrier boards aren't really cheap. I think that they were like $15, so it starts to add up. But I found this really cool because maybe it will actually make another cool video. All right, guys. So remember to get me your questions if you have any questions about Kubernetes in the cloud, because I am making that video. I have wrapped up all my tests, so basically it's just getting the time to record that video, and that will be next weekend. So you need to get me any questions you have that you'd like answered in that video. All right, well, thank you guys for joining me tonight. I hope that you guys have a fantastic weekend. Remember, if you have any questions, you feel free to use the live chat during this, and I will get to them as we're going. And thanks for joining me, and I will see you guys next week at, I'm going to really try to make it 9. Next week at 9. Thanks. Bye.